Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Thanks for joining us at this unusual time of 5 p.m. IST because there is something that is rapidly evolving in United Kingdom and we wanted to be able to share that with you. And joining me today is Pandit Satish Kumar Sharma ji. As always, Pandit ji, namaskar and a pleasure to have you on our channel, sir.
Pranamji, Namaskar, Jai Shri Ram, and Om Guru Pyo Namaha. Thank you very much for the chance to talk. We had a conversation earlier on, and the two or three points that we touched upon, I think, are going to be so important and significant for us to explore a bit further. We're in the United Kingdom. The new year has just started, and in a few months' time, there will be elections up and down the country, local elections. And so the preparation, the slanging matches, the sending of unpleasant memes, and all of that has started at a local level. But there are some issues which are happening on a national level and also on an international level, which affect our community specifically. So a couple of revelations from tomorrow. I think if you're happy to, let's explore them.
Yes, indeed. And to start with, there's this evolving information about a Labour member of Parliament, Barry Gardiner, right? Gardiner,
That's
and
correct.
that he has had some funding from a known Chinese agent, and this has come to light in the recently. And Satish ji, let's start there. What can we tell our viewers about what is happening? Because this gentleman also has received a Padma Shri in 2020 from India. I'll touch upon that a little bit later, but let's first find out what is the
Mm.
latest on him.
Yes, this is exactly the story. Barry Gardiner, he's important to our community because in his constituency there are quite a few members of our community. And he's also always been one of the Labour Party's, shall we say, lead Hindu Indian engagement people. He was always trying to be what Bob Blackman has become over on the Conservative side. And so, where many others had very strident criticisms of the Sanatani community, of the India scenarios and history and the Modi government, Barry's was always a relatively moderated voice. I've seen a number of recent debates where he spoke very staunchly in defense of Prime Minister Modi and the challenges that he was facing in Bharat, and reminded members of the British Parliament that their own colonial history needed to be taken into account if they were going to then get onto the moral high horse and start to lecture other nations. So he's quite a close member of our community. He receives the invitations to Diwalis at the various mandirs and things like that. So he knows us, we know him. And I've engaged with him on a number of occasions. So the revelation from our point of view, I think, has two particular dimensions to it. One is the dimension of security in the United Kingdom, but the other is the connection with Bharat and China. As you've already alluded to, he received a Padma Shri, and the Padma Shri is a, a recognition which is not afforded to many people outside of Bharat, and quite rightly so. But the revelation that has been made is that he was in receipt of probably in excess of £500,000, £500,000, £100,000 per annum, I believe. Further investigations and further scrutiny and research is being undertaken right now. And that was received directly from a lady who has been reported as being, the allegation is from the military intelligence services that she is an agent of the Chinese government. Now, Barry has put up a defense today, but it's a big question, isn't it? What was the money for? There's no answer given to what was the money for. I mean, it doesn't wash, does it, that somebody gave £100,000 per annum just because they thought you were a really nice guy, and he is a lovely guy. There's no doubt about it. Father of a Christian priest, I believe. But you don't take money without having some sort of give and take involved, and he has been so skillful in not addressing what the money was for. If you really want to see an example of how skillfully a politician can tiptoe around a question, try and hold on to a shred of dignity, whilst the argument is so simple, do check out YouTube videos of Barry speaking on this issue. It's ridiculous. So there is a big question mark. We also know that politicians should not only be people who adhere to what are called the Nolan principles, not only should you have integrity in your dealings, you should be seen to have integrity in your dealings. So even if it's a completely innocent arrangement, the very fact that the arrangement exists, that a person who served as a shadow minister involved in international and briefed on security matters has received £100,000 per annum from the Chinese government, who at the moment is in the frame for the Wuhan scenario and all of that sort of stuff, it caused him to doubt his integrity. There's an obvious conflict of interest, and the fact that he wouldn't realize there's a conflict of interest, isn't that a cause for concern with regard to his judgment? So this is a massive, massive red flag for us. We have here a person who's been cozying up and trying to curry political favor with the British Indian community, and yet he is in the pocket. He is paid, receiving huge amounts of funds from the Chinese government. And so that's a cause for concern. Is this the sort of person who should continue to have a Padma Shri? I'm not sure if it is. What do you think?
Well, first off, my limited understanding of how Padma Awards are given is typically that cash that has to be recommended if the person lives in India by, I think, two members of parliament or two really strong ministers at the state level. So it needs some politicians to sign off on this, recommend it, and give an explanation as to why this person deserves it. But since Barry Gardiner is in United Kingdom, I think it is more perhaps due to the influence of some of his constituents who felt that this person, and justifiably so. Here is a lone voice of reason in not lone, but one of the voices of reason in the Labour Party. Because I don't want to, Lisa is also a good lone voice of reason. I don't think she has ever spoken anything against India or British Hindus, as far as I know. And so that's why I didn't want to make him the sole person who was speaking up for British Hindus.
Yeah.
Or Sanatanis in general. But Panditji, the challenge before the Indian government now is, I don't think they'll do anything right now until perhaps they see something happening in United Kingdom, at which point the President of India is fully within his rights to withdraw the Padma Shri Award. So this is big.
Yeah, it is. And the one issue I think which always determines whether an action should or shouldn't happen is the one of national security. And this impacts upon so many areas. We are at the moment in the United Kingdom doing the best to make sure that there are really secure economic ties, that there are future transactions which benefit both countries, that there are trade deals being spoken about. Even at this moment in time, I'm aware that there are trade negotiations going on with the Indian government and the British government. And so, do we really feel that it's the right thing to be feeding groups and to be praising groups and to be awarding groups who act against the interests, or who potentially could act against the interests of both nations? So this is a big red flag. And the wags in the United Kingdom, the meme makers, have come up with some wonderful sort of ways of judging this. And Barry is now being called Beijing Barry in the Twitter space. And it is a worry. We do know that the left has a very strong communist-leaning ideology, and that has never been the ideology of the British people. The British people have been salt of the earth, simple, hardworking. The core, the English character is an incredibly Punjabi-like character. We get on so well and understand each other at that level. It's only the British character which has its roots in colonialism, which is reprehensible. But the core English character is so far from communism, and the Labour Party has been active in trying to move it towards that direction, and it resists. And I see this resistance beginning to really rear its head. I'm beginning to see more and more, shall we say, a mood arising in the country that the Labour Party, which really is the party of the average man on the street and the common man, this is how they've always painted themselves, have completely betrayed their core electorate. We've talked in the past about how so many Labour councils have got severe problems with regard to grooming gangs and those sorts of issues. But the rift between the Labour Party and its own core electorate, I think, is going to get wider and wider because of the revelations which are coming out now.
And I think our own good friend, Washing Machine Jim, seems to be now hobnobbing with Kowloon, and is Kowloon Keith Vaz coming in the news lately, sir? What is the update on him?
Well, this has also just been published and presented this morning. This lady on the side of Kowloon Keith, as you've called him, she's the lady in question, Christine Lee. And as you can see, this is her staffer who was working in Barry's office. And Keith, too, is now being, shall we say, research is being done by appropriate parties to establish the breadth of her connections. But it really does make one wonder, doesn't it? The political class, I think, in this country has never been so damaged and so harmed in terms of the narrative that they have spun so successfully. The gulf between the governed and those who would seek to serve, but who really seek to govern in this day and age, I think has never been greater. So yes, Kowloon Keith is also under scrutiny.
Now, refresh my memory, Panditji. Who was the last Labour Prime Minister?
Oh, it's such a long time ago. There was Tony Blair, who sort of potted around for a while, and then Gordon Brown. I think Gordon Brown was probably the last memorable one. We've not really had anybody since then.
Wow. I mean, it's now 2 or 3 terms the Conservatives have been coming to power. And I mean, they also have their work cut out with Brexit and what have you. So very interesting times ahead as far as I can see, Panditji. And I think we had a very interesting discussion the last time we spoke about vaccination and Sanatana Dharma. What does Sanatana Dharma say? And viewers, I don't know if we'll have time to talk about further developments today, but for sure, Panditji and I will have a conversation on that again, because a lot of developments are happening. Give you a hint, it is along the lines of what Panditji was thinking and I was thinking. So we'll just leave that as a dangler there for you. The next question that I have for you, Panditji, is where does Keir Starmer, or where do you think Keir Starmer is taking the Labour Party? He was trying to right the ship and come to the center. I know we had a discussion. Seems like he is still, he's being pulled back by James Corbyn. But in all these things, what is his stand?
There's a huge problem there. The problem is one of leadership. We're talking about the general mood as well as specifics. And I'm very much beginning to pick up that the nation is now not only suffering from too many people struggling to be captains of this ship. It's almost they're in the wheelhouse of this ship fighting to grab hold of the wheel. But there is a deeper problem, and that is that the nation is almost becoming rudderless. It's almost as though we are witnessing a country not only lose its identity, not only lose its leadership, but also lose its sense and compass. There is a very, very real fear that the direction is becoming guided by chaotic forces, which are reactive as opposed to somebody with a plan. And this is really important with regard to Keir Starmer, because he's never been able to convince anybody that he actually has his own plan and his own vision, that this is how the leadership of the Labour Party would look like. This is the work we would do. This is a list of the goals we would achieve. This is what we would go for. All of those things are absent. And when you're vacillating in that manner, in circumstances where daily the news is changing and you're being buffeted by new pressures and impulses, then a person who doesn't have their own sense of guidance, their own sense of direction, their own sense of purpose, is just a reactive person. And after a period of time, that person, I think, will get buffeted so many times that what happens is they themselves become confused. We didn't see Keir Starmer emerge immediately and say, right, I feel there's a national security issue here, and until this is resolved, I'm going to suspend anybody who has received funds without being able to be able to submit an example of what those funds were for, which is valid and approved. That would have been leadership. That would have been people saying, thank God somebody's doing something, even though it wasn't possibly a good example, but at least it would have been leadership. And so, yes, the Labour Party is as rudderless as indeed the government as a whole.
Panditji, just for my understanding, and perhaps the viewers also want to know, the voters are not bribed with cash before elections in UK, are they?
um, can I not answer that question just yet?
Okay,
Uh,
understood.
but
Understood.
the reason I say that, there are many ways in which inducements can be given, and it doesn't necessarily have to be cash. There can be inducements which are to do with planning guidelines, which are to do with boundary changes. All sorts of inducements have been considered, but I wouldn't say it's as white and as white. It certainly isn't as beautiful and pristine as the British values narrative would want to project.
Thank you. I think that kind of answers my question. There's a European show called Marseille, which is the city of Marseille and the mayoral election. And there, one of the immigrants flat out asks, last time you gave me a washing machine, what can I expect this time? So,
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if one of the prices was perhaps internships or offers of employment in one's MP's office. Just on that point, it has been noted, I heard it reported in the media locally, that Keith Vaz has decided he's not going to return. We're expecting Claudia Webb to step down or be removed very soon. And Keith Vaz has decided he's not going to return. But in exchange for going quietly, the word on the street is that he's seeking, shall we say, recognition for one of his children in the political sphere within the Labour Party. But that's an aside. It's nothing to do with
now,
bribery, and it's completely above board, and it's a lovely gesture. I'm sure they're all friends together, and that's something the electorate should be really happy with.
Now, speaking of sons, I'm also hearing that one of the sons of Imran Khan is very actively involved in the Labour Party. Can you shine some light on that, sir?
That's a bit of news that's quite dated now, but you're absolutely right. It shows a tradition. In Jeremy Corbyn's office, in fact, as I understand, very instrumental in the construction of the Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party manifesto. You know, that unpleasant one in which it had references to Palestine and Kashmir, but nothing to do with the challenges faced by the core Labour voters. Um, Imran Khan's second wife, I believe, the lady who was in the media, her son was employed in performing that role in Jeremy Corbyn's office. So yes,
And
that nexus is there, that connection is there, and the Labour, Pakistan, ISI, China, Breaking India Forces connection. It's very robust. It's apparent. It's very present now. It needs to be dealt with.
Panditji, again, a little bit off of left field here. You know, you come across a lot of British Pakistanis in course of your work stuff. I'm sure many of them are, you know, middle of the road, reasonably minded. What do they say if you ask them, listen, three girls from the minorities in Pakistan are getting forcibly raped and getting converted every day? What do you have to say to that?
Yeah, it's one of those uncomfortable conversations which has to be had. But in order to have these conversations, a container needs to be contained, in which the conversation can genuinely be explored. Areas which are difficult to talk about can be spoken about with respect and with a desire for everyone's well-being. In this country, those containers are very rare. They're very thin. And if you try and create them, it's almost as though the establishment doesn't want to see them created. I have seen this particular issue with regard to grooming gangs here in the United Kingdom being so protected and given a level of, shall we say, it's almost as though a safety bubble is created around these areas and people are not allowed to speak about them. I speak off the record with many people who are Pakistani friends, and they know this is an issue. I have very good, strong connections with a number of young ladies who are activists in the Pakistani community, and they know this is a huge issue. They too are just as frustrated as the majority of the Hindus that this issue is not being addressed. But it needs some sort of political will to say, or political blessing at least, to say, yes, this is an issue that needs to be addressed. The Labour Party is ideally placed to speak of this issue. We have an APPG for freedom of religion and belief. We have an APPG for Pakistan and Kashmir. None of them will touch this issue. None of the MPs who constitute those particular APPGs will touch these issues. So it has to be brought into the frame by people probably from our own side of the border in this.
And very regrettable, Panditji, because I think this conversation needs to be in the front and the center. And if it's not Labor, maybe the Conservative Party can also take a look at it. Because I've heard some things that you, I think, mentioned in a hangout previously, that Home Secretary has been tightening some of the rules. Excuse me.
Bless you. That's the
Thank
consequences
you.
of filming a shot from the icy peaks behind you.
Sorry about that. Some rules are being tightened because there was one British citizen who wanted to return from Syria and she was denied entry, I think, or something of that nature. So that legislation, has it now become law,
Not
Panditji?
yet, not yet. It's still working its way through, but there is a, shall we say, a shift, a zeitgeist, a shift in thinking that that legislation is going to be necessary, and people are beginning to warm to that idea. The extremists, that side of the legal profession, which works for people who perhaps are not working in the interests of the British people, that side of the legal profession are also now beginning to temper their voices. They were very, very strident. Obviously, there'd be a loss of income for them in continuously presenting human rights arguments for people who perhaps didn't deserve them, didn't warrant them. But that is changing. It hasn't happened yet, Sriji. It will happen, I believe, towards the Easter period.
British politics was held up as the gold standard for how to conduct politics around the world. In fact, the founders of Canada dreamed that they would create a country that would have British politics, American technology, and French culture. But then the reality was something else. But be that as it may, my question to you,
Mm,
sir,
mm, mm.
is that what is it I'm hearing about party games in Parliament?
Haha, Partygate. Yes, it's amazing, isn't it? You've heard that saying that for the want of a nail, a kingdom was lost. That sometimes
Yes.
the smallest of things can expand, and the domino effect, the consequences can be significant. Well, nobody would have predicted that this issue would be causing so much difficulty for the incumbent government, but it is, and it's right that it is. For a period when the majority of the country was under a great deal of social stress, when lockdown was very rigid and inflexible, when police were arresting people in parks, when one member of the family who may be elderly, may be in a hospice, maybe even receiving palliative care, end of life care, when that person was prevented visiting rights, their family was denied access to them. It now seems that there have been numerous parties going on, many of them associated with the Conservative Party and with number 10 Downing Street, i.e. directly with Boris Johnson. We'd heard of several over the last week or two, but last night it emerged that there were two more parties held within Downing Street, within number 10 itself, immediately after the death of Prince Philip, whilst the Queen was in mourning, a time of national distress. And so there is now almost an accepted truth, shall we say, that number 10 has no sense of what the feeling of the mood of the nation is. But worse than that, that it's hypocritical, that it's one rule for the proletariat and a different rule for those who rule. And it's difficult to deny and difficult to dispel. It's gathering momentum. Boris Johnson gave an apology at number 10, but also at in the House of Commons at Speaker's question time, sorry. But it's not been accepted. And I have a feeling that more and more of these revelations are going to come. If they do continue, it will be difficult for Boris Johnson to continue with the respect of the nation. He'll probably have enough political will and muster enough support to continue within the party, but that will only go to create an even greater rift between the nation, the people, and those who are running parliament. And as I mentioned, there is a distinct sense now that those who have governed for their own benefit for so long and not accommodated the feelings of the people themselves, that the larger damage could be even greater. So I think they say a week is a long time in politics. I think a weekend is going to be a long time in politics, this weekend especially.
And Panditji, I think there are a couple of questions from our viewers. Can we have the first question, please? I think I saw one or two, and one looked good. So let's at least take a look at that question. Feel free to, you can say, I don't want to answer this if you feel like it is a sensitive topic. Here we go.
So I don't know this particular I don't know the answer to this. Sriji, if anybody on your side has done that research. I do know what research is done before giving somebody an OBE or an MBE and things of that sort. When I was serving as the, shall we say, the General Secretary, the leader on the religious side of Hindu affairs in this country, I was often asked to recommend people and put them forward for an OBE or an MBE, a CBE, and those honours that the Queen gives. So I know the research that's been done on those side of things. I imagine it's similar for the Padma Shri as well.
Yes, indeed. And have you had any request for a CMG?
No. I imagine they're going to, shall we say, shrink now that the Tony Blair toxic effect is going to tarnish that particular one. And who would really want to be counted into the company of the person who I think history will call the Butcher of Baghdad? And so the whole honours system is also under scrutiny at the moment. Sriji, this is an interesting point that I think is worth recognising. What we're actually witnessing is we are witnessing the end, the last days, the decline, crumble into obscurity of the British narrative, which was established on colonialist rule. The world is now knowing that the people who went out into the colonies, they were not nice people. They were psychopaths and sociopaths. They stole all over the world, returned to the United Kingdom, and then lied to the people in the United Kingdom about their greatness and their trading abilities, when really it was just the profits from piracy. And that story has been maintaining the rule of that British ruling class for such a long period of time. And it's collapsing under the weight of its own deceit now. And so we're seeing so many of these fault lines, these cracks appear in the facade. It's going to be an interesting time to see how things settle in the chaos. I just hope that there are enough wise heads willing to understand what's happening and to navigate it to minimize the harm to the British population. I suspect that we're going to see, though, the establishment still trying to hang in there for dear life, still trying to peddle that old, tired story before rolling over and then disappearing.
Well, we come to an end of our discussion today. Oh, there's one more question, last question. Prasad Pandey wants to know, among European countries where some are cracking down on radical Islamists, realizing it's a threat in the future years, what's happening in UK? Does Labour Party really do, or does Labour Party really ignore its impact?
It's a wonderful question, and it's very relevant. The Labour Party made a choice. A while ago, it decided that it was going to speak more about victimhood. It was going to try and play the emotional manipulation game to nurture and get political power. It abandoned the needs and the interests of the core British white English voter. And in making that choice, it aligned itself with almost anybody who was willing to pay to have its cause presented from a point of view of victimhood. It's almost as though the Labour Party became a mercenary or a political prostitute to anybody willing to pay $500,000, in Barry Gardiner's case, in order for the party to represent themselves. But it found itself in a difficult situation because those people who began to pay demanded that the piper demanded that the tune was their tune. And that tune, sadly, has been completely aligned with the Islamist tune. And this is now recognized amongst the voting public. The Labour Party were the first to accept the Islamophobia definition. without doing any great scrutiny as to what the consequences of it would be. They accepted it lock, stock and barrel. The Conservative Party rejected the Islamophobia definition in its form and said, no, this has freedoms aspects to be considered. It has freedom of speech. It has blasphemy angles to be considered. And there were questions asked, such as when one Muslim kills an Ahmadiyya. There was a terrible incident where an Ahmadiyya shopkeeper in Scotland was killed by another Muslim because of the fact that he was a member of the Ahmadiyya group. Is that Islamophobia? Many questions like this were put forward and they have yet to be answered. And so there is, I think, an increasing understanding of the problem with the Islamist voice, which is very vocal and yet not representative of the Muslim community in the United Kingdom. I suspect people are trying to work out how to deal with this issue. But the difficulty is that those who are able to deal with this issue will probably pay a political price. Those who are speaking most in support of the extremist ideologies are those whose constituencies have a significantly coherent voice when it comes to elections and it comes to voting. And so I'm sad to say in Britain of 2022, we have very few politicians who will happily fall on the knife, shall we say, to serve the nation and the greater population at the expense of their own political career. And when you consider that there are people taking £500,000 for apparently just because they're nice friends, it's unlikely to happen in the near future, sadly.
And that brings us to a close of today's program. Satish ji, thank you so much for coming in at such short notice to share your thoughts on this subject. And viewers, stay tuned. We'll have Pandit ji back very soon because a lot of things are happening quickly now. And we'll also find out if the Indian government is going to do anything about Barry Gardiner's Padma Shri. So thanks for watching. Do like, share, and subscribe, and do click on the bell button. Thank you, Satish ji. Namaskar.
Jai Shri Ram. Thank you very much.